Good evening, I'm Jimmy Dore, and this is the evening news on RT. And I want to bring in a special guest host for today. It's Scotty Nell Hughes, and she's a frequent guest on RT and a Republican grassroots strategist and former supermodel. And she will be with me throughout our program today to discuss and debate with myself and our guests. Today, we're going to be taking on two topics, mass surveillance, and then later in the show, the role of whistleblowers. You know, there's a growing number of ways you can be followed, tracked, or recognized by new technologies. For example, the Orlando Police Department plans on continuing a facial recognition program from Amazon called Recognition. Advocates say it's used to find suspects and abduction victims. However, the ACLU and other privacy groups say the technology is primed for abuse in the hands of governments. For more, we turn to cybersecurity expert John McAfee.
Hi, John. Thank you for joining the show. John, this is your first major interview.
Well, thanks for inviting me on again.
Of course. Well, thank you for coming in. We've been quite concerned. This is your first official interview since an alleged assassination attempt last month. Most importantly, how are you feeling? How's your recovery going? And most importantly, have we gotten anywhere in the case? Do we know who did this to you?
I'm feeling great, as good as ever. I think a hospital today, I would recommend it for anybody who's overworked. But I can't speak about the case at the current time, but we're certainly pursuing it.
Well, I am glad that you're pursuing it because we don't like these things to happen. You know, it had to be very scary for you and your family when you realized that that you had been poisoned or however that it went through. Let me ask this question. You have been for years sounding the alarm about the infrastructure and the lack of security on things like our water, our electric grids. Are we sort of in that place right now in America today? Do you feel like we're protective, or are we just on the verge of some sort of cyber security attack?
Well, I'm far more concerned with the problem being with our government. You know, and any government that is so afraid of its citizenry that it develops highly sophisticated hacking and spying tools, which the government does hack, believe it or not, and makes arrangements with companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook, that concerns me. Because any government that is fearful of its citizenry cannot possibly represent that citizenry in the way that it's intended. They need to be servants, not managers and bosses and owners.
So let me ask you, is it true, I hear a lot that the government is collecting data on every email, every telephone call, and every text we make, and they're actually storing it. Is that true? Is that happening?
No, absolutely. And Google has admitted to cooperating with various agencies within the government to pass information about its clients. Now, maybe they're cooperating because of a subpoena or a court order, but still, it sounds an alarm to me. Can you imagine when America was first founded, George Washington and the Senate and Congress spending time trying to spy on the American citizens? No, they were there to serve. And service, by the way, is not a good job. The people who were assigned to serve the people were people who did it out of a sense of duty. Now it's done out of a sense of self-duty, of self-serving, not serving the public. So, you know, I think our government has gone the way of most governments. Over time, governments simply become overbearing and corrupt and need to be changed. Our Declaration of Independence says that we, the citizens, have the right to change or even abolish a government which is no longer meeting its purpose. Now, if I spoke those words on a street corner, I might get arrested. That we have the right to abolish our government? Of course we do. It was created by us, the citizens, and it is now spying on those very citizens that created it. Please, God. So the government is trying to be self-perpetuating rather than serving. This is the problem.
Well, John, let me play devil's advocate right now, as many people are saying that work for Google are saying, well, listen, a lot of this information is things that you volunteer yourself. I mean, you put as much information out there on the web through your social media, Facebook page. You put pictures of your children, their names, the schools they go to. You volunteer this information. So what's the difference between you volunteering it and the government collecting it?
Well, it's not a matter of what's the difference. The problem is, why is the government collecting it? Sure, you put a lot of information out there, and I would use it for entertainment. You know, photos of your dog, how wonderful, or photos of your house, or whatever. Yes, you put that information there, but I don't go into it to try to spy on you or to try to collect data on all the citizenry to make sure that we are all in line and not breaking laws and not in any way threatening the status quo of the government. This is the problem. Not we volunteer it, sure we volunteer it, but the government goes out of its way to collect it, collate it, and analyze it. That's the problem. So yeah, who cares whether they have to do it surreptitiously or we hand it over voluntarily? They are still making a huge effort.
So what should be more, well, my question for you, John, what should be more concerning to you, private business doing it or the government, or are both just as concerning?
Well, I think the government is more concerning. I mean, private business is not there to serve me, but the government is. We created our government to be a service, to do the things that we could not do as individuals or small groups, like build roads, create a national defense. Whereas the private business, I have the choice. I can choose not to buy a shoe that's advertised on Facebook. That's my choice. And private business, I can choose to have nothing to do with them. They do not own me. They do not pass the laws. They do not control me, whereas the government is attempting to do that. So absolutely far more concerned about the government doing it than private business.
John, I wanted to ask you, I want to talk to you about facial recognition and how, you know, the problems with that. So it seems to be pretty effective on your iPhone, but when police try to use facial recognition to identify known criminals in crowds, it's wrong. Well, since they've used it in trial, it's been wrong 90% of the time. So what are the dangers of facial recognition technology being in the hands of the government and the police state?
Well, if it's being used by the police state to apprehend criminals, and it's wrong much of the time, then I am going to be apprehended sometime, or you are going to be apprehended sometime, wrongly apprehended. And surely, is our criminal problem so bad? Is it worse now than it was 50 years ago, where we had to go out and interview people and do some footwork? I don't think so. And you know for a fact that this facial recognition will eventually be used by corrupt powers within the government, within police agencies, within the FBI, to somehow keep tabs on everyone, to make sure we are all in line, to make sure there is no threat to the government. But really, threats to the government are natural as governments become less responsive. As they serve us less, of course there are going to be, revolutions even. That's how governments change. But here, we can do it peacefully. I mean, we have in the Article 5 of the Constitution says that if we are sick and fed up with the status quo, we can have a constitutional convention, throw everybody out, and start a brand new government. Please, we have that option. But try it. If you try that, you're going to be harassed by every agency within the government that is threatened by such a task.
Well, to broaden this conversation, let's bring in legal and media analyst Lionel. Lionel, thanks for joining us. And we're talking about an issue where many people in the government, actually there's a fine line to walk here. The government says they're doing this out of national security and to keep you safe. What is that fine line?
It's bunkum. It's poppycock. What do you think? Let me see if I can put it into this perspective. We are a country of sheeple, mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging idiots with a generation who was born in captivity, who doesn't even understand the concept of surveillance. We have this machine right here and others just like it. And we are constantly putting in biometrics into it. Our thumbprint, our visuals. We're putting where we are, our money. All of us are going to be put into a 24/7 worldview panopticon. We are going to be on a screen 24 hours a day. Every bit of data, every bit of information regarding you. That may, to the untrained eye, may seem like, well, what do they want from me? I'm just a nobody. I'm not hiding anything. And that's what gets Americans. I'm not hiding anything. And then it goes into this huge batch. And anytime they want to pull that out, cull it, relook at it, perhaps put it into an algorithm, predictive programming, you name it, Minority Report, it's here. But listen carefully. The moment, and it's going to happen, mark my words, flag the tape, as we used to say in radio, the moment we have little chips, RFID chips or something that is placed subcutaneously, as they've done in Sweden, this younger generation will flock, wait in line for hours, days, to have this put in us. The moment that happens, that becomes part of us, it's over. And it's coming.
Okay, so wait a minute. You said that this, first of all, if you don't have anything to hide, Lionel, what are you afraid of? Anyway, but secondly, I'm kidding. But secondly, what did you just mention
and
about...
you're a great kidder.
They're putting...
You crack me up.
Well, let me ask you a question about what you just said.
I can see that you and I are going to get along fine.
About the chip in Sweden. I've never heard about that. Can you elaborate on that, what you meant by that?
Of course you haven't. Of course you haven't. I'm going to tell you what else you haven't heard. We don't have time for that. Let me tell you what's going to happen right now. Mr. McAfee, I'm sure, will concur. One of these days, because we're a country of idiots, okay, we're going to have this chip. And you're going to be, one day, let's say you're some kid. Hey, look at this. I don't even need a wallet or whatever. I go into a store and look at this. Here's the bill. Look, there we go. I just paid for it. Go into a cab. Hey, look, there we go. This is fantastic. All my medical records. Oh, we love medical records. Look at me. Oh, there I am. And then one day when you go into a court and you're found guilty of something, they're not going to put you in prison. They're not going to put you in the hooskow in the pokey. No, they're going to turn your chip off. And poof, you don't exist. And it is coming, and it is here. And the worst part about it is, with all due respect, and it's not really their fault, we have a country, what's the word? Yes, of idiots. Fools, rubes, chuffs, churls, boors, Boeotians who don't even understand what we're talking about. And as I'm speaking, and Mr. McAfee is trying to warn the world, they're sitting there with a thick web-like drool that's coming out of their mouth because this is incomprehensible, because this is cool. Don't tell me about cops looking for us, OCR. After all, they're trying to find the bad guys. Of course.
Lionel,
look,
let me break in for a sec. Let me break in. John,
please.
What he's saying sounds very scary. What can we do to protect ourselves?
Can I answer that question? Let's go back to
actually,
the very
hold on. We're close to a break
premise.
here. Hold on. We're close to a break here. I think that because this is a good answer for this one. We'll return back to Terminator/Revelations as soon as we come back from the break. Now we'll also be joined by whistleblowers Ray McGovern and Colleen Rowley. So make sure you stay with us, and we're going to get this great answer when we return.
I lost the audio.
Redacted Tonight is a comedy news show that is not defanged by the corporate media. We can go after the corporations that destroy our lives, profit over people at every turn.
Redacted Tonight for me is like medicine. It's like an antidote from all the stress that the news puts you under.
Redacted Tonight is a show where you can go to cry from laughing about the stuff that's going on in the world, as opposed to just regular crying.
We're going to find out what the corporate mainstream media is not telling you about, and we're going to filter it through some satirical comedic lenses to make it more digestible. That's what we do every week. Hard-hitting, radical comedy news like Redacted Tonight is where it's at.
I'm Jimmy Dore, and I'll be hosting a week-long series of debates here on RT America. In-depth analysis and commentary on the topics that matter the most, but mainstream voices ignore or distort. Like the future of U.S.-Russia relations, the plummeting trust in mainstream news, the slow creep of America's surveillance state, and the whistleblowers who risk it all to bring us to truth. Syria, the Middle East, North Korea, and more. Don't miss it.
Called the feeling of freedom. Everyone in the world should experience freedom, and you get it on the open road. The world according to Jesse. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
mainstream media, swarming with falsehoods, riddled with censorship, and under corporate control, is incapable of truly informing its audience. It can't rise above the corrupt motives of those calling the shots. When you awaken to this fact, turn to RT America, where we dare to question more.
Okay, so now we turn, first of all, I know you were expecting to see John McAfee come back and answer that question. Unfortunately, he had to leave us. So now we're going to turn to the whistleblowers who have risked their careers and sometimes their lives to tell the world the truth. Now, you might remember the case of NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, who came forward about the NSA's mass collection programs. Snowden is still in Moscow, and it remains to be seen if he'll ever return to the United States, where he would likely face trial. Last year, whistleblower Chelsea Manning's 35-year sentence was commuted by President Barack Obama after she leaked classified information about civilian deaths, torture, and war crimes in Iraq. Meanwhile, the fate of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange remains to be seen. Reports are growing his asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London is coming to a close. For more, we're joined by two whistleblowers, former CIA analyst Ray McGovern and former FBI agent Colleen Rowley. Thank you for being our guests. And my first question to you, Mr. McGovern, is can you tell us what do you think the inevitable prosecution of Julian Assange means for the rest of journalists?
Well, it's a shameful act, and the real shameful thing is that the media has not risen to his defense. He's been promoting the truth. He even got a left-handed compliment from the U.S. intelligence people by saying that the reason that WikiLeaks is believed is because they don't adulterate any of the information they have. The connection, of course, was with the revelations about the Democratic National Committee. So it will be a shameful thing. And the most shame will be attached to those who profess to believe in a free press, but when push comes to shove, they're obsequious to the powers that be.
Colleen, you've had some blowback, obviously, for your whistleblowing. You know, if they were to bring Julian Assange back here to the United States, what would you expect would be the reaction? Would there be cheers in the crowd support him, sort of like what we're seeing over in London right now with a journalist that's held in captivity? Or do you think there would be an off-with-his-head type mentality in the streets because of the DNC and how they blame WikiLeaks as the reason why Hillary Clinton possibly lost?
Well, unfortunately, I think everyone is aware that we are in this hysterical moment. You know, crucify him, that type of mindset, which our media has really generated. Going back to that earlier question about our free press and our media, it's not only shameful, but they are really defeating their own self-interest. They aren't thinking ahead at all because they will be the next Julian Assanges as soon as they try to expose any serious wrongdoing, even things that negatively affect themselves. And so they need to really start thinking. Some media have actually gone ahead now. There's been some. And there have been a number of activists have started to organize support for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So it remains to be seen in the longer term whether people will come to their senses or not. Unfortunately, right now, I think insanity is almost the rule.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So what do you think it is about the press being silent on Julian Assange? I mean, this is the biggest story affecting journalism, I think, in my lifetime. And, you know, Barack Obama was big on prosecuting not only whistleblowers, but journalists. And you would think that they would, you know, everybody's upset when Trump makes a tweet that's critical of Chuck Todd, but they're still, you know, again, they're cutting their own throats by being quiet about Julian Assange. Is it just because their corporate overlords are telling them to?
That's correct, Jimmy. You know, it's very clear, as we pointed out, when we gave Julian Assange the award for the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity, we gave him that in October of 2010. We pointed out that the so-called Fourth Estate is dead. Now, this happened in London, of course. We're referring to Edmund Burke in 1787, the same year that our Constitution was completed, where Edmund Burke got up and said, look, there are 3 estates here in our Parliament. The 4th estate, you gentlemen up there in the press gallery, you're more important than all of us. Well, the 4th estate is dead, not moribund anymore, dead. So the only hope is the web, the internet, and shows like ours to shed truth on things. Now, Colleen has written a terrific article, which she will well remember, she with Bogdan Zakovich, in which they queried people who knew about what was coming on 9/11. And they asked FBI agents and people in the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, who ran red teams into the airports, ran them into the planes, who found out that they could easily penetrate the planes. They said, now, if Julian Assange were up and running before 9/11, would you have gone to Julian Assange to ring the bell and get through that bureaucracy and tell the American people what to expect? And they said, well, Colleen can corroborate this, yes, they probably would. So Julian performs a function that does no longer exist in the mainstream press, and he should be awarded rather than vilified for what he's doing. One of the things he has done is speak out about Palestine. My friend Miko Peled was on your program a little earlier, and I think that when you look at the genocide, and I use that word advisedly, you know, there was no Julian Assange during Auschwitz. There were no whistleblowers during Auschwitz. Well, there are whistleblowers now during the genocide in Gaza. 2 million people without clean water to drink, blockaded from the outside world. That's what we need, a whistleblower that blow that whistle and say, look, the U.S. makes this possible by $4 billion a year given to Israel. We have to stop that. That's why I wear this BDS bill. That's the way we stop it.
Let's talk about content and what's actually some of these whistleblowers. There's a difference. We're seeing whistleblowers a lot with the Me Too campaign that's bringing out things that have happened in Hollywood. Here's my question for you. Is there laws here domestically? Now, obviously, everybody goes to another country. Is there laws, do you think, that could protect you? And why is it that certain focus is put on content, or more importantly, put on the person doing it so that we don't know or focus on the content? In the case of the DNC leaks, where we saw there were some very racist and homophobic and horrible things in those emails, we don't talk about that. Instead, we're putting the focus on Julian Assange. Why do you think content, Colleen, should we put more of a focus on content rather than the actual person that's exposing it?
Well, of course, and if you realize that a whistleblower is nothing but a witness. So, for instance, I worked 24 years in the FBI, and if there had not been an insider that came in to tell you about the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, actually any ongoing fraud, public corruption, bribery, and even organized crime, if there are not people that are on the inside that come in and tell the FBI what's going on, the crimes essentially doesn't stop. So public safety is the same type of thing. If there's no one that understands a danger or a threat and has a way of getting that out in the press, somehow, some way to the public, then it's of no point to know anything. You know, we're going into almost the dark ages of ignorance if we shut down whistleblowers. To answer your question about is there a mechanism, at the end of the Obama administration, because he was under some pressure and had prosecuted 8 or 9 whistleblowers, and there was quite a lot of angst about this, that we were suppressing the truth, Obama was forced to say he had developed a intelligence community inspector general that you could go to that would actually be effective. Now, unfortunately, it's been proven totally ineffective. They have even fired their ombudsman recently, and there's all kinds of issues of corruption even inside that inspector general for the intelligence agencies. So everything they've essentially tried, and the reason for this is they need to suppress the truth in order to, they think they need to suppress the truth in order to control public opinion. We are in a war, and they are using, same thing happened during the Vietnam War when you saw the suppression of My Lai, when you saw the Pentagon Papers. the fact that many of the good reporters were actually on the CIA payroll. So this type of thing happens, and people basically loyalty-wise say us versus them. The media says this to themselves, us versus them. We can't tell the truth about ugly things that we are doing to other foreign countries. And the media is, essentially goes along with it. That's the root problem, and that needs to be fixed. They need to have witnesses, sources. Reporters are just like the FBI. They're not going to know the truth without someone coming to them and telling them what's going on.
Well, what people don't know or talk about is, we were talking about the failure of the Fourth Estate, is that in 1996, Bill Clinton ushered in the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies. Now we have down to 6. So every news organization now, the problem is, we used to have journalists investigating corporate criminals in government, and what happened was the criminals got smart and they just bought the journalists, right? So now the journalists work for the people they're supposed to be investigating. When you watch Meet the Press and you see Chuck Todd throw to a commercial for Boeing, well, nobody's watching that show wanting to buy a jet. They're sponsoring NBC News so they don't do an investigation, not so that they do investigations. And the red flag is since that has happened, they've replaced objectivity with neutrality. Because you could be an objective journalist and say that guy's a liar, and that's not true. But if you're neutral, all facts are equal, and no one's a liar or full of it. And that's why we're ending up in this place we're in right now. And you mentioned, Colleen, about how Barack Obama had passed legislation that was supposed to protect those whistleblowers. It's failing miserably because the backlog is going back now. It takes 167 days in a lot of cases just for those reports, the whistleblower reports, to even get looked at. And so by the time they get looked at, people have left jobs and moved on. And so that's let me ask you before we have to go, I'll throw it to both of you. Do you think we'll ever regain the expectation of privacy ever again in the United States? And will we ever protect whistleblowers for real?
We won't unless Jimmy Dore and people like him get more exposure in the media. Even some of the so-called progressive people like Amy Goodman have drunk the Kool-Aid on things like Russiagate. So unless Jimmy and compañeros succeed in getting more exposure, there's not much hope in the immediate future.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you being with us, and that's the news on RT America this evening. You follow me on Twitter at Jimmy_Dore.
And follow me on Twitter at Scotty N. Hughes, where there is no fake news on it. So hope you guys tune in to us tomorrow night and have a great evening.